try and do photography and film projects from ideas just kind of that I've seen, and I'm like, that's really good, that's interesting, how can we expand on that? But this podcast is pretty much an extension of my interest, and I think the story needs to be told. There's more depth, there's more layers to everything.
Well, I mean, as we know, the magazines aren't doing photojournalism or documentary. They haven't got the space, and we all have to look for different ways of telling a story.
Yeah.
Whether it's an exhibition or doing books or doing stuff like this.
Yeah.
Otherwise, anything you create is just chatter, and it just disappears. No one ever gets it,
I had this very conversation with my wife last night, because I was looking through the book, and I kind of missed, back in the college days, I missed the days of just exhibitions, going and seeing an exhibition that's coming out of a body of work which someone has spent, could be 6, could be 8 months going out to do, and then you come back and then you're going to display this to show the world, and it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort to get things right, to print it up, to put it on the wall, to kind of do the press release, to do it. There's a lot of involvement to make something like that, and now it's just, I've seen it, and it's gone. You're like, I've put so much work and effort into something. You really want, you don't want the pat on the back, but you want people to see it, and you want people to kind of absorb it and get the story from it, and that's what I think about.
I feel that people who are creative now, you have to be able to defend and explain whatever it is you're creative, whether it's poetry, painting, photography, or whatever. And this is a way of doing it. So you want to crack on? And
I mean, this is this.
Okay, well, that's why I was thinking, hang on, anything interesting.
Because this is the conversation I'm trying to have, is just this, two people with very similar interests who can have a conversation and just delve into various avenues, however it goes. And to me, that's the beauty of the podcast, the long form conversation. Because we do know a lot of things about people, because we've seen it and read it. I mean, your life is it's fascinating. I mean, I just wanted to start out, my whole idea was to start out by, just to kind of go back to how I sort of met you, or I came across your work, because you've been a massive influence, and you still are. Your work is still a massive influence in my life because of the storytelling aspect. And I know I moved to London to assist, and then I emailed you, and you replied back, because you said I emailed a good email. The format was good. It was, hi Tom, dear Tom. It was sort of, I was explaining what I was wanting to do and the journey that I was going to take, and then you said, okay, Dan, let's meet, let's chat. I'm here to help. Because not everybody does that as well. Not everybody helps. So I was kind of honoured that you had time for me to sit down and give me a little reality check as well. Because I came in, I think it was in London, in the flat in London, because I was assisting in London. Just moved down there, and you said, you've just got ideas, Dan. Where's the story? And that sticks with me today. And that's what I carry forward in my work today, is that, and I will pass that on to whoever I see needs that little bit of advice.
Well, two things there. I mean, the way I was brought up was to help people whenever possible. And but at the same time, I do, the amount of emails, requests that I get, and I know you do, that are, literally not put together by people who understand that photography is pretty much run by words people. So they don't think about sending lowercase, very informal messages. They think that that's okay. But if you send messages like that to the picture editor at The Guardian or the editor of The Independent, or you're not going to get through the door if you want to be in editorial. So the first thing is about being able to ask reasonably. And even if you're dyslexic, which some people are, your tutors should still be able to point it out that in the first instance to how to how to write an email requesting an interview or some help. And I always tried to, coming from the Northeast and arriving in London like you did, I really understood the problems that, you arrive there, you've got no idea. I'd never been in London. I'd never been to London before I went there. I had no idea of what I was stepping into. So when other people down the line asked if I could give them some advice, I always try to. I mean, now I'm kind of in the phase that I don't ask for advice or give it, because after 50 years, I don't think I've got a wealth of experience, but also things have moved on so much. The industry of photojournalism, the photography industry, has moved on in such a way that I don't really feel qualified to help a kid who's in college or studying photography. But with you, I mean, you also need to recognize someone who wants to be what I would call a real photographer, somebody who wants to tell a story, give a voice to people who might not otherwise have the opportunity. I mean, I kind of pee off my fine art friends, because I always say that fine art photography is about look at me, and editorial and documentary is about look at this. I like to be kind of invisible in the story, and give a voice to the people that we photograph. It doesn't matter whether they're visiting a food bank or on the streets, or whether they're a queen. I photographed Queen Rania of Jordan last year, and it doesn't really matter. I try and treat everybody the same. But I did recognize in you somebody who I felt really understood how tough it was going to be, and wanted to do a good job.
You almost need to have blinkers on. You need to have that drive, and the passion needs to kind of that has to be at the forefront of every knockback in everything. Every person that says no, you can't do it, and that to me is when you've had that in life, you go, okay, I have to do what I need to do now, because this is what I really need to do. I need to be a photographer. I need to tell stories. I need to do this as a living, whether it be commercial. It doesn't matter, as long as if you're in the game earning living from photography, you're a success for me.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that when I'm sure when you do this as well, when you visit colleges and media studies groups, the thing that strikes me is how naive they are and innocent they are about what it takes to be a professional photographer. Apart from the skills, what you alluded to there, the drive, the need to be able to express yourself with a camera. I mean, the camera's just a tool, isn't it? It's you make pictures with what's inside your head and your heart. If you were a writer, the pen would be the tool, but it doesn't guarantee that you're going to be a great writer. So I think that a lot of the kids who have this idea of being a photographer have no real idea about what it takes these days. I don't mean to sound like an old man. It was tough when we were doing it as well, and probably
Still
harder. Yeah, as I say, we're now experienced. People still don't return the calls. They still don't return the emails. They still, it's still very gladiatorial. Thumbs up, thumbs down. I find the support from picture editors, people in positions of the people who hold the purse strings, is quite poor, and it always has been. And it's up to you to push through it.
Yeah, because you've got to fight the battle, haven't you? Really, you've got to fight the battle. But I think for me, at the end of the day, I'd do personal projects through the passion, and I have to do these things. And if it's a good story, I'll tell the story, and that's used as personal work to possibly push my commercial work. I was in Edinburgh on Friday. I was in London last week, showing creative people, and they love to see the personal work. Might get you just a job with some headshots, but it's that dedication that you have for this art, and people love to sit. They love to sit, look through paper, a book. They love to see visual imagery. They love to see creativity and the story behind it. And for me, it's more about the story behind it now, and that's where I think your influence has always had on myself is there has to be a story behind it. And I was looking through your book, Eyewitness. I was fortunate enough to be in London when this was on the South Bank, so I got to see this at the time, which was fantastic to see. And I think I took my little girl to dance on Sunday, and I thought I'll take it. I've got an hour to sit down, and let's make some notes and just refresh and kind of do that. I think I was 30 pages in, Tom, and I was starting to get that lump in the back of the throat. I was starting to feel slightly emotional. I was sitting with headphones on. I was just in my own little corner. And I'd only reached page 25. And that's the effect that these images had on me. And it's such a powerful thing to be able to tell the story. And I mean, I can't imagine what it was like to be in the moment, to witness these with your eyes.
Well, I look at the book now and I'm still proud of it. I'm still proud of the way that it was produced and presented, the paper, everything. And I feel that if you do this kind of work, it's very important the people that you photograph are the most important, to respect them, try not to take away their dignity, try and tell their story. But it's also it's also something that you keep inside you. I mean, there are photographers who do a book every year, and I've only done 2. And this obviously is the most important one because I felt I had something to say at this point, but I wanted it to be the best I could be. And when we put the exhibition on the South Bank, and another one that I had more recently, I didn't want it to be in a gallery where your mates come and drink cheap wine and then no one ever goes and looks at the pictures.
Yeah.
I wanted the pictures to be in the public domain. I wanted to stand next to mums with their children and listen to, as I have done, listen to their children say, "Mummy, why is this little boy not got enough to eat?" Mm-hmm. Because that's when you realize as a communicator that you can be effective. I mean, in our business, when you're doing editorial and reportage, you used to come back with your film and then present a folio of pictures to a magazine like the Sunday Times or Time magazine or whatever. And if they used the pictures, you would rush to the newsagent on a Sunday and get the magazine, but you were never quite sure whether it was being effective because you're not there when the people open the magazine. But when you have an exhibition and you can have it free and it's in the open air and people come, you can stand there and they don't know who you are, and you can just listen to the silence. In some silence is more powerful when people are looking at this kind of work. And I got a lot out of it because it actually reinforced my idea that doing this kind of work, despite all the hardships and lack of support from publications, is important. People do want to look at these kinds of pictures. That's why when McCullen and Salgado and Nachtwey and these guys have an exhibition, people stand 5 deep. Mm-hmm. They are curious about what's going on in areas of the world where people don't have enough medicines, they don't have clean water, they can't switch on a light. It isn't just a world that is full of royals and celebrities and the Kardashians, etc. People are interested, and as long as there is interest, I think it's important that photojournalists go and do these stories.
complete. I mean, for me, it's accessibility, and you being able to put on a public exhibition, give everyone access. You can just walk along and what are these photographs? Even if they don't know who you are, they're going to pay attention, because I think it's a human story, and everybody can connect with the human story, and it can take away something that might mean something to them in their life, someone who they've lost, and that to me, that to me is what it's all about. Is the connection? I mean, one of the images in the book, which is very well known, is you've got a lady being born giving birth on one side, and there's a man dying on the other side, and there's a little boy who's maybe 2 years old in the middle, and in one frame, you've captured pretty much life in one frame.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't often happen as a photographer. I mean, where I was working was, a desperate place. I was working alongside Médecins Sans Frontières, and was at a feeding center in Sudan, and famine is a weapon of war, just like rape and all of these things are so terrible. You can't imagine until you see mothers burying their own children and thinking, well, what's going on? In this period when we're so wealthy, why is this happening? So, that I was working in this area with MSF, and I came on this scene in a hut where a lady was giving birth, and her two sisters were helping her, and there was her little child, one of her other children, was sitting there, and on the MSF nurses had brought this man in out of the sun to literally die. And I think I only shot 3 frames on this scene because it was so, I realized the enormity of it, but also on a technical level, and you'll know this as a photographer, outside it was blazing sun, and the exposures was, and inside there was no light. So I didn't think the camera and the lens and the film would actually handle it. And also I just couldn't, I knew what was happening in front of me. But when you do that kind of work, it's, I was only there in that situation 5 days.
Yeah.
And, I brought out a lot of pictures that were very disturbing, I felt, and so did other people. But what I was trying to say was that, this is not right. This is not fair. And this shouldn't be happening. And in the middle of this nightmare, there's all these amazing kind of MSF staff trying to put their finger in the dike, and help people. And so you see this real humanity on the one hand and inhumanity on the other hand, and the politics of greed, if you like, and negotiations with the various military forces who turn the tap on and off with food. It's always much more complicated than we think. Yeah. And you can only show one side of it. But I think it is important that people go and do this kind of stuff. I want to know about it. If it's happening, I want to know. I want to know what's happening in Yemen. I want to know what's happening in Congo. I want to know, because we have a responsibility and we can't just turn away from it.
Yeah. I think possibly one of the most recent photographs that still stays with me and actually made it into the mainstream was the refugees coming off the boat, and the man holding the dead boy in his arms when he was coming off the boat. I think that kind of made it through all of the media platforms. I think this is maybe 2 years ago. And it was diving. No, it wasn't one of yours, Tom. But your pictures and this image kind of resonated with me, as you don't really see this in the mainstream, whereas this image actually made it. Somebody holding a dying or dead child drowned from trying to get across the water.
Well,
to safety.
that's one of those things I've never been able to figure out. you remember the picture of the little boy on the beach
Yeah.
in the Greek islands, and
Yeah.
Why that picture? And there are other pictures. The lady at the demo in America, where she's standing up to the police in riot gear. Why? And that's the magic of stills.
Yeah.
Video, you could record the same thing in video, and it flashes in front of your eyes. Video doesn't embed itself the way still photography does, but it's not enough just to get the moment. There has to be something else, some ingredient that people identify with. With the little boy on the beach, I don't know if it was the way he was being held, or there were lots of the photographer. When I worked in Lesbos and those areas, I went and worked in that area, and the local photographers were saying we couldn't work out why this was such a big deal.
Yeah.
We photographed lots of people who've been washed up on the shores. But this picture just grabbed the attention and grabbed the attention of the world.
Yeah.
And that's the power of a still, a great still. And that's what we're trying to capture, photographers like you and me, and in all of our work. Actually, it's the same in commercial and advertising. Mm-hmm. You want to give the creative directors what they want, but then something else, some magic that they can look at and go, that's what I want.
Yeah, because when you're going back through images and you're doing a little edit, there's always one that's there, and everyone kind of looks and agrees on the same image. There's always something there in that image that has something.
There is, and I know you do a lot of commercial, and that's another thing I would tell young photographers. They do think that they can buy an air ticket and just go off and come back as Don McCullen or Nactway. When you have to explain to them, or when you try and get it through to them, that to be a working photographer, a pro, you have to feed your family, to pay the mortgage. Yeah. You have to work for clients, and those clients, what you need to be able to satisfy, they hire you to give them what they need. Yeah. The personal work and going off on an assignment is a luxury, really, and is a very important part of what we do because it forms you. But to be able to come back from doing an editorial or reportage job, and then suddenly you're thrown into a team. You're sitting in a room like this, surrounded with an accounts director, a creative director, the client. You've got the logistician, you've got the producer, whose job it is to make the whole thing work. And that's one of the things I find quite difficult, and I have done, is to suddenly be part of a team and realize that, the other thing that I know you must have had this as well, you sit around in these meetings at the ad agencies, and you're right, the creatives love looking at real pictures, because that's actually what they want to do. Mm-hmm. They look at your book and then they go back to making baked beans look sexy or whatever. Yeah. But that's one of the reasons they love looking at your kind of work. Yeah. But you have all these meetings, and then you kind of come the day of the shoot and everything, you suddenly realize that everyone's looking at you, the photographer, and they kind of, you think, what they're looking at, what's that silence? And the silence is, right, make it happen, make the magic happen. Yeah. We've given you everything you need. You've had a say on the wardrobe, even the catering, the security. There might be 30 people on the set, and all 30 of them are looking at you, the photographer, to give them, the creatives, and more essentially the client, give them what they want. And that's a scary thing when, you might have just come back from a shoot on your own and wandering around in, Kielder Forest or wherever, So it's the skills needed to be a professional photographer. And by that, I mean feeding your family and paying the mortgage are varied in many.
I think for me, in that scenario, it comes down to people skills, and it's very much people management and skills, because doing the job is probably 20% of what you've gone through for the past 2 weeks of all of these meetings and the creative process, and then you get to do it, and then it's like, okay, and it's just managing everything, because there's probably everyone has an opinion, but there's probably 3 which need to be said and need to be discussed at the time, just to get that job, that image, that whatever it is, the conception across. And yeah, and then you think to yourself, just send me to the middle of nowhere with a camera, please, because that's what we love. That's why we started this job.
That's exactly it. That's what we want. Yeah, but unfortunately, we have to deal with maybe 15, 20 people who, I get it all the time. I get, not all the time, I'm not doing as much now, but I get called in, to these agencies and say, we're interested in using you on this shoot, this product, this. And the first thing they show me is color.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, well, 90% of my life has been black and white. And sometimes the other thing that always makes me laugh, and I know you've had it as well. They bring you in and they go, well, this is the client and this is what we're thinking of. And then they show you maybe 10 or 15 of great images.
Yeah.
Pictures that they've got from the website, from Magnum, from whatever. And you just sit there and you go, look, if I could shoot this, I wouldn't be sitting here working for you, would I? It's so you have all of that to deal with, and how mentally, how you deal with it, and how you deal with it. When you've been working all day and you're on a conference call at 1 a.m. with a client in Japan and they say, we don't like it. It's they pay you a lot of money. And there's a reason they pay you a lot of money when you're doing work like that.
Yeah.
And you kind of need to know how it works. It isn't easy to do, as you well know.
There's a game. You have to play the game. It's the same of when you promote yourself. You've just got to have your finger in all the pies, and you've got to be out there on all platforms, and you've got to be doing it constantly around the clock, even more so now, because everybody's a photographer. Everybody can be a videographer, a director, or whatever it is, a creative. So the competition is rife. But you still, for me, it all goes back to just if you can shoot what you're passionate about, then that will certainly tick the boxes inside of you that started this journey of you being a photographer in the first place. I mean, I love the challenge of, all right, 20 people are looking at me. Okay, let's just humor this. Let's see how this is going to work. Oh, there's a problem. There's not a problem that can't be resolved. I've never come across one. And I love the challenge, and I love kind of orchestrating the thing. But I equally love standing in the middle of a field by myself watching the sun come up. You can't beat that feeling.
Absolutely. That's because one feeds the other. If you're not doing personal work, again, going back to younger photographers, and people hire you because they want you. They want you. They want to feel that you're going to bring something extra. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a mistake for young people, not just young, but photographers who only constantly go from one corporate campaign to the next, to the next, to the next, because eventually they'll have nothing to say, really. All they're doing is kind of fulfilling the dreams of the creatives or the clients or whatever. I think it's important to go and stand in a field or on a beach at Tynemouth and watch the sun come up. I mean, if don't go to Bamburgh Castle, because there's a crowd of people there on every morning, as you well know. So, and if you go to Tynemouth, you'll have Owen Humphreys and people like that standing next to you as well. But these, it's important to regenerate and feel. I mean, I'm going off in a couple of weeks, just on my own, a couple of cameras, and nobody, not a phone, nothing, just to kind of regenerate, if you like.
That's the best thing.
Reconnect. Reconnect with your camera.
I think just to be put in a new, strange place with no agenda and 2 cameras. That's probably one of the perfect scenarios I can imagine, especially for myself. Love it. Let's see what we can create and come up with. I've done projects by just having a conversation with somebody and it's triggered something. Recent project, Tales from New York, was just pretty much just chatting to the Uber driver. Ended up with a mini promo book. It's just one of those, but it's the interest in the people. Then you go, okay, that triggers this and that triggers that. So you kind of, the fire starter kind of
Absolutely
be lit
and now
from
we've
that.
got another dimension. This is another dimension.
Yeah,
where,
this is great.
Where, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever, you'd go and shoot a feature, and we never heard the voice of the people involved. But now, you want to hear their voice. You want them to write the words.
Yeah.
You want them to paint the pictures. Who are you? You find somebody interesting, and it's not enough, the one dimension of just a photograph. You want to hear them talk about their life. So and it adds to your photographs.
Especially the journey. For me, the journey is important. I know everyone has one. There's 1,000,001 podcasts about journey stories, but everybody's is individual. Not one person's is the same. Some are easy, some are harder, and there's always a story that you'll pull from it. But it makes you stronger and it makes you better as a person, I feel, because you've been through certain things. And if I can just really set the clock back to, why did you become a photographer, Tom?
Well, basically, because I don't have the hands to be a fisherman.
Yeah.
I was brought up in Beadnell, went to Sea House School, really the only thing I was good at, it was a secondary school, so we already at that point, you hadn't gone to the Annick Duke School, failed your 11 plus, you were, I wouldn't say on the scrap heap, but it was going to be tough to get away from the building industry or fishing, or a lot of my schoolmates went, and they were the original Wiedersehen Pet. They went off to Germany and Jersey to make money to build houses and whatever. And really, I couldn't see myself doing that. My dad was a farm worker, worked for the Duke of Northumberland, so we lived in a tied house and all of that. So I had quite limited opportunities, I think. But I could string a few words together on a page, and I was always interested in the local papers. So I had this idea of maybe being a journalist. I thought that would be interesting, and I had great support from the headmaster of the school I was at, who encouraged me a lot. But when it was luck, and you need to be lucky as well as good, I think, in this business. So there was a little advert in the Berwick Advertiser saying, we need a trainee photographer. And I thought, well, if I could get that, I might be able to swap and move over to be a journalist. So I went for the interview with the chief photographer. I say chief, there were only two of them. And really, I got the job because they wanted someone to cover the patch that I lived in, Sea Houses, Bamborough, that kind of that thing. So I got the job and started work. I managed to pass my driving test on my 17th birthday, and I started work about 2 or 3 weeks later. And it's 50 years next year.
Really?
So since I walked into the Berwick Advertiser, and on the first day, the same guy who hired me said, "You'll have a champagne lifestyle on a beer salary."
Yeah, I remember you saying that to me.
It's still absolutely true, and it's still the same. But he was right, and I learned the skills that you talked about earlier, communication skills.
Yeah.
If you're doing 5 dinner dances a night. On a Friday night, and you're doing weddings on a Saturday. I mean, the whole wedding, not just turning up for a snap. You're at Haggerson Castle, and everyone's drunk at the Pigeon Fancier's dinner, and you have to get them into some kind of group. You have to be able to talk to people and get them, and you've only got 10 minutes because you've got another dinner dance in Wooler.
Yeah.
So you learn how to adapt and talk to people and get what you need as much as you can and quickly as well. This wasn't photojournalism. This was hatches, matches, and dispatches.
Yeah.
But it did teach you the importance of communication, also the importance of newspapers in a community. I was amazed at how people did want to be, you were welcomed into pretty much everywhere you went, you know, and I liked that. I mean, very soon I realized that I didn't want to be a reporter, because even in those days, the reporters sat on the phone. They didn't go out the office. They picked up, you know, council meetings and from people who'd been there. But even the local photographer, we had to be there, and we had to be out meeting people. And you know, I remember going to Holy Island and Lindisfarne were playing in the local pub at the height of their thing. I'm thinking, I didn't even know really what it meant. If I wish I could do it now, and you know, I would have the images would be much more valuable. But it was those kinds of things, and I spent 5 years doing it. I was very, I loved it, and I didn't really see the need to do anything else. And then, you know, I kind of started looking at books and realizing there was more to photography than I thought.
Yeah, because I'm interested in your transition from, say, a press photographer to being a photojournalist. I know obviously it's got to be in you to have that interest and have the eye to frame things and not just turn up and do that picture, the image that needs to go in a certain spot in the newspaper. But there is a way of doing things, and there is a way of seeing things and telling the story within an image and making it look interesting and good.
That's right. And, you know, I didn't have any photographic education. You know, I had no idea who the greats were at that time. And I was just happy to be doing something I really loved. And then I thought, well, I could maybe do this better. I should stretch myself. And I started looking around. I tried to, you know, get a job on the Newcastle Journal and whatever, because I did want to stay in the area, as most people who are born here do. Yeah. But then I got a job on a picture agency in York. And that's where my real passion for, I was still a press photographer, and I wanted to be the best press photographer that I could be. Yeah. I was following, I mean, the likes of Don McPhee had been at the agency, and there were Daily Express photographers who'd been there. And I was working for a guy who knew what it was to be a photographer working for the national press. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, you know, these guys would come up to York, or I'd meet them on jobs, and I suddenly realized what an amazing life they've got. You know, they were very well paid. They had exciting lives. They would travel the world. Their jobs were, they never did the same thing twice. Yeah. They had great camaraderie. Yeah. I mean, actually, Newcastle was one of the areas that at that time, the Daily Mirror and the Sun and the Mail and you know, the Guardian, everyone had fantastic reporters and photographers here who served the northern editions of the national press. So I got immersed in this, and I thought, wow, this is very exciting. And then I was on a job, and I met a very well-known reporter, a writer, who came up to do a feature on the fishing industry, and we had dinner, and he said, you know, you should look at going to London. And so that sowed a seed. And he said, there's a job going on the Daily Mail in Fleet Street. And I thought, oh, well, I'll call the Daily Mail. Surely they'll want to see me, you know, the naivety of youth. And I called from a phone box outside York Magistrates Court, and I got put through to a famous picture editor. First mistake I made was that it was before 10 in the morning. Right. You know, he famously was drunk every night and whatever. And the second mistake was I actually thought that he would know who I was. And I'd had a really good run. I'd had, you know, pictures, half pages in the Mail and the Mirror and Express and all of this. And I thought I was a bit Jack the Lad, and I called this guy, and he just destroyed me on the phone and said, I've never heard of you. If I haven't heard of you, you're obviously no good. Yeah. And if you're ever in London, come and see me, but I know you won't. And he put the phone down, and I was absolutely distraught, So the next day I got on a train and went to London, and I made an excuse to the agency boss, and I got on a taxi in King's Cross. I'd never been in London. Said, take me to Tudor Street to the Daily Mail, and I just walked past the concierge in this kind of amazing building, up the stairs, and the second floor. I said to someone, "Where's John Lyth?" And he said, "Well, that's him over there." And that open plan. I walked across a newsroom. I'd never been in a newsroom, and I had this little collection of pictures under my arm, cuttings from what I thought were amazing news stories, how to make a jumper out of your Samoyed dog fur and all that kind of stuff. And I knocked on the door, and he looked up, and I said, "My name's Tom Stoddart, and you owe me 15 minutes of your time."
Yeah.
And didn't know who I was, and I spoke to you yesterday. We sat down, and he went like that. He went through my book, didn't say a word. And he said, "How much is John Peck paying you at the press agency?" And I told him, and he just looked at me and he said, "Okay, I'll give you a 3-month contract as a freelance." And that was the start.
Yeah.
And I went to London, and I realized how tough it was. I was destroyed every day by photographers who they were faster, they were brighter, they were sharper, they knew the area, they worked together, they gave each other necks. I was this lad from the sticks. Mm-hmm. But there were nice people there as well. Northern people, there was a lot of people who helped me, and and I got through it. And I did my time in Fleet Street. I ended up on the Sunday Times newspaper, but all the time, and there I worked with amazing photographers and amazing picture editors, and it was different, but it was the same. Mm-hmm. We were still filling holes in going with a writer, and the writer would tell you what they were going to write, and you had to try and illustrate it. And I always had this thing that I had a story in me, Mm. Why not let the people you're photographing explain who they are and what they're doing? And that was my transition. I left the Sunday Times, and I joined an agency and started shooting sets of pictures and becoming an author rather than a filler of holes.
Yeah, telling the story.
That's it,
multiple
exactly.
pages. Yeah. I just want to drop back into that determination that got you in on the train, in the taxi, and into his office. Clearly, that's the drive. That's the inner drive that's kind of carried you forward since day one.
I think you're the same.
Still have that?
Exactly. You can be a nice guy in this industry, and actually no one likes a smart ass, and you find that as you go further and further through it. But you do have to have an inner strength. You've got to have a steel. You've got to have curiosity. You've got to know that this is going to be uncomfortable, but I am going to do this because if I don't do it, I'll always regret it. And even now, they look at people like you and me, nice jovial lads, like a pine gun, watch a match, all that kind of stuff. But when we work, your concentration is important, I think, as well. Yeah. Focus. What am I trying to say here? What do I want to do? And when it's hard, I do think, that's when you kind of, because essentially photography is quite lonely. Yeah. Even if you are with a team or with a writer or whatever, it's the disciplines that you need come down to yourself and what you've been, where you come from. Yeah, because we all have that in the head of, is this working? Is this not working? Is this shot right? Is that shot right? Did I get that? Did I not get that? Can I do anything better? It's this self-doubt that keeps. So there's nobody outside can see anything to you that's not as bad as what you've got running inside your head. Absolutely. So, and when we're all insecure, and the ones who aren't insecure don't, they're not normally the people who create anything that's worthwhile. But I remember you also have to be a realist, and you have to be truthful to yourself. I remember coming back from Kosovo when the ethnic cleansing was going on, and we finally got in, and I thought I'd done quite a good job, and I came back to the office in London, and I had my stuff, and we were marking it up, and then John Reardon came in from the Observer, who, alas, is no longer with us. But and I was, John Easterby, the picture editor and the editor, he wasn't very effusive about my material. And then I realized why. I've been totally outshot by a better photographer.
Yeah.
And I looked at his work and I thought, I really didn't do myself justice or the story justice. And you have to be truthful. And that's why I think you have to be truthful, and you've got to accept where you are. If you think you're going to be Don McCullen or Salgado or whatever, it's the day that you realize that you're not, that these people are special. That's when you can start and have a voice.
Yes. Yeah. Completely right. Because if you're trying to be somebody else, you're never going to be them, because there's already one of those people. You need to be who you are.
There are very few of them as well.
There are very few
at
of them,
that level.
Yeah. Because, I mean, even if you ask them, they wouldn't, I don't know how it happened. It just happened because...
But you look at the lessons you get, it's only when you work alongside people like that, you realize that, Nachtwey is a genius. There are very few. When you work alongside them and people like that, and, they're framing the way they think, the way they move, the way they interact with people, their work ethic, up every morning at 4, 5, out, they don't go drinking at night. They go on, in those days, they were in their rooms, marking up their thing, shipping it that night back to New York, 2 or 3 hours sleep, back on the story or whatever. Salgado, his great triumph, apart from his books and whatever, I mean, the fact he was still doing stories like Migration and Genesis at the age he was and is, the fact he's still hungry. The people, Albert Watson, the fashion photographer, who you see, I looked at a YouTube thing the other day of him shooting landscapes up in Scotland. Yeah. These guys are 70, 80-year-old. I was with Don the other night. Yeah. And, you say to him, Don, why are you still working? Why are you still getting up? And so, I'm running out of time, Tom. I've got so much more to say.
Yes.
And the guy's like 82 and a night, and he's had his books and exhibitions. And yet, and that's the thing that you have to understand, that the hard work, the drive, the thing about fail to prepare to fail, make sure your equipment's good, make sure you're set up as much as you can, and then trust to luck. Yeah.
I mean, you've got to put yourself in these situations to capture things. So how do you make that decision of, I'm going to go, and I'm going to go now, this is the right time? Or is it, I've just, because I had a phone call and I was there and just, I did my job?
I think, as I say, it's better to be lucky than good sometimes, but there's a good example coming up. It's 30 years since the Berlin Wall fell. And, it's probably the luckiest I've ever been. I was in Berlin, in East Berlin, shooting the demonstrations, because there were demonstrations, political demonstrations against communism and the communist leaders. I had a 2-day assignment, so I was there in East Berlin. I came back to London with my bag of film, as we did in those days, and we developed the film, and we sent it to New York for Time magazine in time for their deadline. And I said to the Jeff Katz and John Easterby, who were running the agency, I think I should go back to Berlin. It's such a massive thing going on there. And okay, well, we'll try and get Time magazine to support you. And they couldn't get any support at all. No, we've got what we need. And no one would pay for the air ticket or whatever. And I said, well, I'm going to go. So I went to the embassy. I got a visa.
Okay.
This is on November the 8th. I got on a plane the next day, the next evening, to Tegel in Berlin. And I was sitting on this plane thinking, I don't know why I'm doing this. I remember it. I'd love to meet him again. There was a guy on the plane, and he came back and he said, sorry, are you a journalist? I said, I'm a photographer. And he said, I'm a writer from the Cork Examiner, and I've never been on a foreign, and I won an award in Ireland, and I asked him if I could go to Berlin, but I've never done this before. Do you mind if we travel together? So he sat down with a couple of whiskeys on the flight, and we got off the flight in Berlin. It was about 9 o'clock. We get in the cab. And I said to him, yes, but I'm going straight to Checkpoint Charlie because I want to go through to the east. I have a visa to go through to the east before the border closes tonight. We're sitting in the car and the radio came on and the driver stiffened. And I said, what is it? He said, they're opening the wall tonight. We got there like 30 minutes later and there was no one there. It was so kind of surreal. And then people started to appear. All these people started to appear. Dozens, hundreds, thousands of people. And I managed to get between Checkpoint Charlie and the checkpoint on the east side. So I was in no man's land when the very first people came through. And, obviously photographed everyone, photographed the scenes that night, managed to make a quick call to the office. They called Time Magazine and, I won't tell you how much they paid for the film, but it was a very lucrative night and they could have had it for a couple of $100 in the morning. And then the next morning, I was at the wall when the first section came down, the section we always see of the wall falling, it fell inwards. And, it's 30 years ago. Bizarrely, I was lucky, but I was still outshot. The guy next to me, Anthony Soir, won the World Press with his frame. Yeah. And, I didn't, millimeters, but it's just to witness things like that. And that's been the most amazing thing, to see things and be there at events like that. It's, incredible.
Yeah, it's to witness history with your own eyes.
It's a cliche, but it is. When you're there and you see that happen, you see what it means to thousands of people and mean to the world. Yeah, and it could have so easily gone the other way if the East German border guards had, opened fire and whatever. So you realize, and there have been occasions that I've stood there and think, this is incredible.
Mm-hmm. I mean, clearly that must have been, is that one of the best moments you would say, Tom, of an experience? Because there's been a photographer getting the shot, you might have your favourite shots, but as an experience in life,
I think there's been a few. I spent 6 weeks trailing Mandela during the election and when he was elected as the first black president of South Africa. That was incredible. The Berlin Wall, that is something that is very memorable. Yeah. And but there've been other things, little things that spring to mind. That it's not just the big events. It's sometimes you meet somebody, and you realize when you listen to their story about who they are and what they've gone through.
Yeah, because automatically, just like me, I'm thinking, oh well, there must be a big moment, but also I'm thinking from my perspective of it's the person that I just met yesterday who has a fantastic story that nobody knows, and those stories are the ones that I carry with me, and those are the important ones, and the most kind of that just kind of I could stand there all day and talk to these people and just about their life, their journey there, and that's a moment for you to kind of have and you to carry on and tell. And
I think it's a privilege. I mean, I know it's slightly corny, but I mean, now I've been doing this long enough that strangely now I revisit stories. Yeah. So, for instance, Berlin Wall for the 25th anniversary, it's the 30th coming out on obviously next November, this November coming, but on the 25th, I thought, I wonder if I could find any of these people who I photographed on that night. Yeah. Because it was dark. I didn't take any names. It was I didn't even really know what I was photographing until. So I went to Berlin with my assistant, and we started the old-fashioned way. We started putting pictures and posters up around Berlin, around the station, saying, "Do you know this person?" Yeah. So I took about 15 images from the night, from November the 9th, and I started trying to track them down. And eventually I found 6 who, as you say, I went back and re-photographed them and talked to them about that night and what it meant to their their life, how their life changed, because it did. It changed for everybody. And it's fascinating to go back and talk to people. I did, in Sarajevo, I went back and photographed people I'd photographed during the siege. And it's a real privilege to know that they'd survived a conflict like that, but B, that they were still alive and, peace was there. So, I don't like getting older and losing energy and all of that, and not being able to see and all of that. But I do like the idea of going back.
Yeah.
And because you're in these people's lives for a split second, and then you're gone. Mostly, if you're shooting a fast-moving event like the fall of the wall. I know that you worked at the food bank, coming closer to home.
Yeah, the West End Food Bank. Yeah.
And I also did that. Like you and I are similar. We think of ideas. We try and think of things that are interesting to do. Mm-hmm. And as we know, that particular food bank's the busiest in the UK, and it figured in the movie. And I wanted to go and talk to the people who were going to get food. And Michael, who ran it at that time, was an amazing guy, wasn't he? Amazing person. And he said, "Well, yes, you can come. I'm not sure many people are going to talk to you, because they're proud and for obvious reasons." So I was there 3 weeks, and I managed to get about 8 people to talk to me and tell me their story. And this is the point, I realized that these are not scavengers or people who were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I could have been these people. Mm-hmm. I met crane drivers who had been earning massive amount of money, who had been injured in an accident and just couldn't deal with it. I met people who had just through bad luck, circumstances, had found themselves having to go there and queue up and pick up food. And it was very humbling. And it also, teaches you don't have to go around the other side of the world to find a story that's interesting. Yeah,
they're on your doorstep, and I think it's important to show that, and that's what I want to see. Because in the wards, you see so much. Oh, that's from that country. They've gone there. They've travelled there. They've travelled there. Where is the stuff at home? Where are the stories at home? Why aren't people doing it? There's yourself. There's another guy, Adam Hinton, and I know he does a lot of really good work close to home as well. And I want to see more of that, and I want to tell the story of that. And I mean, from my perspective, it was the volunteers which I looked at, but the stories that I had, I sat down to do little sound bites to add to VO over the top of the images the portraits that I took. And 45, 50 minutes, we were just having conversations, and the stories that I heard, a nurse with two girls, she was there in between shifts getting food, and there's so many different stories, and people, the volunteers who they themselves had come down. Scott, he came down, his family come down to get food, and he volunteered in the kitchen, and they actually helped him get a job as a porter in a hotel. So now he's got a job through going down there and volunteering himself. So now he goes back, volunteers his time as well, and works as a porter in a hotel. And on the day I was down talking to him, his mum and dad turned up for food, and I'm like, there's a whole, there's so many layers and stories, and to just one person from the food bank. I got heckled a few times by people in there, but that's a mental health issue. It's of
course, but it was the right time to do it, and by the way, I've not had one picture published on that, and I'll come back to that. But when I did it because of the universal credit issue, and the fact that the government makes these policies and laws, and the people that they foist them on, they don't have the capacity to be able to carry it out, and it was creating great hardship. I think you also met, I think it's Katie, a young,
Katie, it's lovely to hear a young person's perspective.
absolutely. And, I don't have kids, but if I did, I would be saying to them, don't need to go to India to find yourself or whatever. Get yourself away down and get some reality
Yeah.
on your doorstep. And she was lovely.
Because I asked her, sorry, Tom, because I asked her, because it's lovely. She was doing her like a kind of gap year, and she was working there as a volunteer. And I asked her kind of, how do you feel from working here? Has it changed you? And she said, when she goes home, she just goes home and opens the fridge, and there's a fridge full of food in her mum and dad's house, and just that opening the fridge has an effect on her because of where she's volunteered to work, and she's seen the other side of that.
Yeah, incredible. I mean, I think she was from Jesmond or Gosford or somewhere, and the fact that she's done that, and she'll never forget that. Yeah. It's such a great lesson. But just to go back to no one's doing these stories. I think. Go ahead.
Sorry, no,
go ahead.
I'll probably correct myself. There probably are people doing the stories, just I don't see them as a commercial photographer, and they don't get picked up in the limelight. Sorry, Tom.
I think one of the reasons is, again, I mean, if you look at it in America, they still have a very strong local newspaper tradition, and you sometimes see wonderful sets of pictures from young photographers or any age photographers who live on in an area and document their areas. Mm-hmm. We don't really have that here. Mm-hmm. So I don't see sets of pictures that are cohesive and where people have spent a lot of time doing this subject. And people tend to, if they do something, they tend to just stick it on the internet. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's a waste, because there's so much out there that there's no point spending months, whatever, and then just putting it out there and no one sees it. Mm-hmm. I mean, a great example, I just was at the Side Gallery on Saturday, and Ivor Prickett's pictures on the ISIS are on show there now, and it's a terrific exhibition. I knew him when he was just starting out and young, and now he's a really passionate, well-rounded photojournalist. Mm-hmm. He's traveling around. He's at his strongest. He's working for the New York Times magazine, but he spent like 3 years in Syria and Iraq doing this work. A lot of the pictures I haven't seen, and to go back to what you said before, exhibitions, books, this kind of thing. We have to engage people. We have to kind of cut through the chatter and the noise. Mm-hmm. And when you want something said, there's no point doing this kind of stuff if they end up under your bed. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the hardest things of the job is if you dedicate the time and you make something that is worthwhile, don't let it just drift away. The hardest thing is to force it out there somewhere, whether it's an exhibition or a book or whatever,
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, it kind of fascinates me that, I mean, people who dedicate their lives. I mean, I know I shared a flat with a guy, Aubrey Wade, who you might know, in London when I was there. And Aubrey, he kind of cut relationships out to go, okay, I'm off to South Africa. I'm going for 6 months, and that's what I'm doing now, just to tell a story. I think it was kind of rap culture as well. He was doing the music industry culture. So it was just one of those that it's the dedication that somebody puts their life into to do that. I mean, as yourself, how much dedication has photography had on your life?
Dedication?
As in, have you sacrificed, Tom, to a degree?
I don't think so.
You
Well,
mentioned you didn't have kids, but that's obviously a personal choice. But was that something that you possibly would have went down, or Roddy would have went down, or you just go, well, no, my life is to do this, to tell the story?
I think, I'm looking back at my life now. My life's changed since I came back to the Northeast. I got married like 4 years ago. I love the Northeast. I love not having to be in London. I've got a home life. I've got different priorities now. But for many years, I did have a flat in London, and it literally just went off at the drop of the hat. Looking back, I wish I'd had a mentor earlier on in my career, someone who could point the way and show the way. I got to be successful at the press side. I was photographer of the year twice and all of that, and that was a really big deal. Mixing with the top photographers from the Mail and the Express and the Mirror at that time. I went to some amazing stories, amazing things, but in the end, I wanted to be an author of my own work. But I wished at that point that I had someone to kind of take me under their wing and show me how to do it. I would have been a better photographer or a better storyteller, or done more important stories over a longer period of time than I have, and that's a regret. Personally, I didn't get married until 4 years ago, as I say. I think that's probably because I didn't meet the right person rather than anything to do with photography. But it doesn't help. I remember being in Sarajevo, and I was in the Holiday Inn, and it was being shelled pretty awfully. And one of the guys at reception, because he couldn't get a phone call out or anything, he said, "Come and there's a phone call." So I was hiding down behind the desk on the phone to my partner at that time, and she said, "When you're coming back, we've got a dinner appointment." And I was like, "No, I can't come back." But, it was one of those things. We used to say that if you were hearing the BBC World Service, do 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 do, it was divorce music. The more you heard of that, the more it meant that you were spending far too much time away. So, but I can count the bad days I've had in this career on one hand. I've been very lucky, and I've been very lucky to work and admire. I'm not a jealous person. I love when other photographers do really well. I love, I admire people's work, young guys especially, who are out now trying to compete and have something to say. But I also admire the older generation, the real too many to mention, but fantastic photographers who by and large are really generous to each other and support each other.
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty good profession to have been in.
Yeah, I mean it's obviously you're looking back now, and what's your opinion on? Have you got a varied opinion on humanity and kind of how it's changed over the years? Has it changed your opinion on people, or have you kind of come full circle? Is this kind of it's maybe a little journey from what you've seen to now, when you reflect on the past, have you changed your opinion on people? I mean, I'll push politics aside because that's just a never-ending circle.
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to be careful that you don't become a cynical old fart. It's kind of like I think. I mean, McCullen says that everything he's done has been, not made a difference at all.
Yeah.
I don't agree with that, and I think as photographers, we can't expect to change the world. I don't think anyone can, but you can have this drip, drip, drip effect. And along the way, if you're lucky, you can change some lives. There are obviously lots of examples of photographers who stumble on something and then make a real change in that person's life. But overall, it's bizarre, isn't it, that there are more photographs being taken now than ever before, and at the same time, and there's still some great photojournalists out there working away, and you just wish that they would get the recognition and that they deserve. But there's very few places to display the work. And I think, if you think of the other thing is the number of photographers and videographers that are on, like, a story like Hong Kong, not just dozens, but hundreds. The world is very small. People can get to these areas easily. So that's a big change. And I think it's great that, I think that one of the biggest things, obviously, has been digital photography. I remember prior to digital coming in, the World Press Photo Exhibition was won pretty much each year by the same group of people. And they were the photographers who had the backing of big magazines and picture editors who could afford to submit, 20 beautifully printed 20 by 24 prints. So the guys, the people in Bangladesh and China and other places like that who didn't have that kind of access, they never won. And now, digital has, it's much more democratic, I think. So that's a good thing that in that way. But I still think it's a great time to be a photographer, especially a young photographer with something to say. The world is small, and you don't have to go to these big events. You can do smaller things. The most important thing is, we're going full circle here, is to have a story. Have a story that doesn't just interest you, but is it interesting to someone who lives in Rome or Memphis or Calcutta? I see too many things where photographers they're still trying to imitate other sets of pictures. You see people come to you and they'll show you yet another story of people living in boxes in the Strand. But they never come to you and show you a week in the life of the Duke of Westminster. They're still fixated that if I do that and I get a mouse in someone's mouth, I can be Don McCullum or whatever. They miss the point entirely. They don't understand either themselves or the business or what they're trying to say. They're just imitating stuff. They're not actually curious about the world around them. And I think that's a problem in an era of so much information, and so people have got very little curiosity other than outside their WhatsApp or Instagram.
And I just wanted to finish on, it's a big question, but just, we're talking about life and reflecting on life. Is there one kind of thing that you've taken away from everything you've seen and you've witnessed, Tom? Obviously, there's good people and there's bad people. We know this. It can happen around the corner, up the street, different countries where you are. Money's always an issue, one of the biggest issues in the world, I feel. But just as a human being, what do you carry forward? As in, I learned this in life.
Well, I think that I'm an optimist, and that's another big thing. I think in any kind of media, you have to be optimistic and curious. My name's Thomas, doubting Thomas in the Bible. If someone tells me something, unless I've seen it myself, then I'm kind of wary of it. I'm not saying I don't believe it, but I like to see things for myself. I've learned that people, by and large, are the same all over the world. There's good, there's bad, there's funny, there's evil. There's mostly it's full of people who are just trying to do the same things we all are: feed our families, have a good life, stay free of disease and whatever. The problem is, the world isn't fair, because even now, after all of this, there are huge regions that don't have access to medicines, don't have access to healthcare, human rights, women's rights. I did 7 years shooting the AIDS pandemic all around sub-Saharan Africa, and if women were more empowered in that region, the thing wouldn't have been as catastrophic. And it's just things like that. For all our the world is smaller and the communication is instant. We don't seem to be addressing these things really. We're not really addressing them. Of course, the environmental thing is bigger than all of this, I feel. But, I'm not a pessimist, I'm an optimist, and hopefully we will get a group of political leaders who look further than their own ambitions. And, the time is ripe for a world leader, for someone who can actually cut through the bullshit and make a difference to the billions of people who are living, not on the breadline, underneath it. It's just not fair.
Yeah. It's just finding somebody who's honest, truthful, and who has all of the other boxes that can be ticked.
I've worked closely with Cameron. I work behind the scenes with Cameron. I work with Blair behind the scenes. And these guys, they're not bad guys. Yeah. They want to make a difference because they don't want to be. And when they do this, and when you're actually with them behind the scenes, and you think, why are you doing this? Why would you want to do this?
It's an impossible job, isn't it?
Well, there isn't. It always ends in tears.
Yes.
You think of Thatcher, you think every prime minister we've had in recent years, it's ended in tears. Yeah. And these days, obviously, they spend so much time firefighting because every minute they're being assailed from the media and whatever. Now, I'm not saying the media shouldn't, but they spend their entire life kind of not doing what they should do. And you just think, what and every now and again you witness something and you think, oh, this is so good. I remember I was with Blair and I was on his plane on the night he won the election, and he flew down from his constituency here in the northeast down to Stansted. And there was only 7 of us on the plane, and I had to fight like anything to stay on the plane because the TV companies wanted a camera on there, and I did a deal where I shot video and then gave them the camera. But on the plane that night, I think there were only 7, including Alistair Campbell and his agent and Cherie and Tony Blair. And he was sitting there, and Campbell's bleep was going, Labour gain, Portilla out. And he's sitting in one of my favorite pictures I've got is he's just sitting on his own in the dark. Almost, there was hardly any light. And, this was the moment he realized he could be prime minister for 10 years. I mean, they knew they were going to win, but they didn't know by how much. And you think a young kind of forward-thinking Labour prime minister, he's going to do amazing things. We get in the cars. He arrives at the South Bank. And, his amazing phrase, just as the sun comes up, a new dawn has risen, has it not? And all that hope and expectation. And then you see it just fall through the fingers as he takes us to war more times than any other prime minister. His alliances with Bush and whatever, instead of making such a big difference at home, which is why he was elected. And then Cameron's the same. You hire these guys to get it right, and when you get it wrong, you can't expect anything but flack.
Yeah, it's tough. You haven't got many people to choose from. They're all from the same pond, and I feel we need to look elsewhere. But where and who else?
But that's the point. They know who's going to put themselves through that,
Exactly.
MPs, by and large, there's far too many of them, in my opinion. All of these are just my opinions, but there are good people in the Parliament who are doing their best, but the way it's all set up now is archaic, and they just can't move forward. As you say, we need to choose people from a bigger pond, but who's going to put themselves through that? If why not go into business, or why not go in to be a scientist, or why not go into medicine instead of putting yourself through that? So it doesn't look good, I have to say, but it's not fair that the weakest in the society, in our society, and the world society, are being overlooked.
Yeah. I know it should be about the people, and that's what it's.
Let me ask you a question.
Go on then, Tom.
Well, it's interesting. You live in this area, you work in this area.
Yeah.
You travel to London a lot to see
and
the.
I've got the imposter syndrome, and I still have.
No, it's not that. I mean, because we live in different times. I had to go to London to work in Fleet Street, and therefore be considered to be sent on things. And now, mostly. The movers and shakers and the creatives don't really know where we live anyway. So, and I believe it's much more healthy to live in an area like this.
Yeah,
keeps your mind fresh. It keeps you grounded. But I mean, how do you see? How old are you now?
I am 42 now, Tom.
Right. So you're strongest, yeah.
Well, when we met, I was 29. Strongest, possibly, but am I doing what I want to do? No. Am I where I should be? No. Where I want to be? No.
Yeah, but that's because you
the ambition, and the drive.
I think it's not. It's not just the ambition. It's this feeling of, I wish I was more effective. I wish I would. It's not personal ambition. Yeah. I didn't. It's nice when you win awards and all that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, it's one of the things that we have to do, because you have to enter, because. Otherwise you've got to try and climb to the top of this pile.
Yeah, I feel I'm always having to go around the back road. I'm always on the B roads. It's never the A roads. It's never the simple route. It always has to be around the back. And when you get recognised, that's fantastic. But all you want to do is for people to see your work, to give you the chances to shoot more of what you believe in and what you want to do. That's all I'm trying to do. And I put every single waking hour into trying to think of the next thing that I really want to do and the story I want to tell. But I've got to play the game of the commercial photographer as well. I've got 2 children. I've been back in the Northeast for 13 years. I did 3.5 years assisting in London. I know the game. I have to play it. I wish I didn't. I like this. I
think that, everyone has to play it because... And as I say, you point to photographers who playing it and they're still, they're 70, 75, 80. And they're playing it because they love it more than anything. You wouldn't carry on if you didn't love it. And
I have to do this.
It is frustrating. And like I said, it's lonely.
It is.
It is lonely. And it doesn't get any better whether you're living in London or New York or whatever, because it's what's inside you that... that's where the loneliness comes from and the frustration. Sure, you have to deal with some people who, are only on picture desks or in positions of power because they didn't succeed on the road. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's how it works, in a lot of this. But all in all, I bet you every morning you wake up and you're glad that you set off on this journey.
Best thing I've ever done. Best thing I've ever done. And the first person to ever be self-employed in my family as well. So that's another thing. It's kind of, I wasn't brought up in that mindset. It was all about go and get a job. And from doing that job, then you figure out, I don't want to do this. I want to do something that is passionate to me and what I love to do every single day. And yeah, every day is fantastic.
I bet you tell your kids that as well.
That is my main point of... that's what I push a lot. I mean, they're only 4 and 6, but I push that on them now, is to forget about what anyone else is thinking, doing. Do what you really want to do and focus on what you want as well, because it's a waste of energy focusing on what other people have and the shiny things in life. It's about what you want to achieve. And I think the achievements for yourself are more rewarding than anything you can buy.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's lovely to talk to you.
I've heard you talking about a lot of things. I don't want to talk about the same old thing. And I wanted to... The whole point in doing this is my voice, which is possibly not the most articulate, and I can't express things how somebody else could, but I'm trying to do it as me. And this is the whole point. I'm trying to do it as me. And hopefully people will watch it and listen and see it, and it'll inspire them. Or
it's enjoyable, and I think it's important. I did a thing with. It's a sign. There are two things in my life recently that you realize. Well, three if you include the through the night peeing. But one I got a call that this lady at the National down in London. She's doing audio documentary things, and it's put away in some vault or other for forever and ever. And it's like I did 2 days down in London talking to her about, and you can talk totally off the record, and then you can say I don't want it released till I'm dead and all that. And the other thing is I got a lifetime. I was sitting at a dinner a few weeks ago, and they gave me a lifetime achievement award, and you think, oh, that's the end.
How did that feel? How did that feel, Tom? Yes.
Well, I'm 66, and I'm kind of thinking, but it's more the perception that you've done it and you're finished. And I wish there was one more story in me. I think there is, but it is an interesting journey when you start off at 17 and then suddenly you're 66 and you look back and you think,
yeah, I mean,
because it happens like that, and you've gone from 21 to 42 in blink of an eye.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I think I met you. I was 27, 28. It was those years because I did everything late because I actually worked for a living before I did this, and that's when you love. That's when you find out what you want to do. When you hate every day of your life, and you're in a social circle which you don't fit into, and you kind of still don't fit in, but I can dip in and out of lives. I can dip in and out, and I love that. I kind of like going in and doing the thing and then getting out again. I don't have to sit with the same people every single day because I'll be like, get me out of here. I need to go. I need to do something different. I need to kind of just sort of run free. And now, I mean, it's hard even thinking about it. I'm married. I've got 2 kids. I've been together with my wife now over 20 years, 22 years, 23. We met when we were 19 or something. It's like that kind of thing. So the journey we've had, and we've come through IVF. We tried for 6 years. We lost 4. My little boy is adopted. And then 3 months after that, my wife got pregnant with my little girl, Ella. Fantastic. We've all got a story and we've all got a journey, and that's kind of mine. That's my journey, and that was very, very, very hard because when you're going through, we've just got married, we'll wait a year and then we'll start trying to have kids, and you're 7 years into a marriage and you kind of, why? What's going on? Why isn't this happening? But I'm all about sort of, right, okay, we'll have to make a choice at some point in time. Draw a line in the sand and then move on from that. And I'm very much going, right, let's just move on. But what happens if I really now, I'll just do it. Hence doing the podcast, same thing. I'll just do it because you don't know until you actually step over that line and find out. And that to me is the most important thing. And I try and push that. But more about the doubt. Who cares about the doubt? Just try it. Yeah. You'll learn so much by stepping over that line. And we did it through adoption, and then all of a sudden we've got a little girl, and we've lost and we've gained, and we've kind of, and now we've got 2 kids, exactly the same. They're both ours. I don't think of them any differently, apart from their attitudes. One's harder work than the other, and that's kind of it, And I've got to keep these little people entertained and alive for the rest of their lives, and that's the driving force. If I was by myself, I don't know. It would be difficult. I'll probably wallow in a room of self-pity a lot of the time, but it kind of keeps you moving, Yeah,
no, I consider myself incredibly lucky, and in the last kind of quarter of my life or whatever, I think it is important to be, it's important to be happy, and I think that it's simple stuff.
Yeah.
It's simple stuff. The photography is very important to me. It always has been, but it isn't. It isn't. I can't say it's life, if you like. I mean, we had 2 little cats, and they both died in the last 6 weeks. And that thing where one was 22, so it's 104 years old in human terms, and you take it to the vet, and to put them to sleep, and you kind of, and it's terribly painful, and you, but it's part of life that, you know, IVF is part of life. Meeting people, we're just so lucky to be able to meet people, like at the food bank, or you know, on the beach at Lesbos. I came back. I did a thing where I went from Lesbos all the way, followed them all the way through to Berlin, and you know, the first day I was on the beach, and you're not really sure what's happening, and there's media all around in there, and you just see these little dots on the horizon, and then you think, well, what's that? And then you realize, and then you see there's orange, about the color of the microphone there, and then you see them coming closer and closer, and you realize they're boats, and then you see the people, dozens of them, and then they hit the beach, and this weird stuff happens, like the local Greek mafia run in, first thing they do is grab the outboard motor. There's all this cacophony of sound of these people who've never crossed sea before. They've never seen the sea. And they think they've arrived in Europe, you know. And the mafia are grabbing the motor boat engines to ship them back to the mafia in Turkey so they can come again. They stab the boats for some reason, and you see all these jackets being, and you think, and you see people in wheelchairs, and 20 people in a family, and they're all heading to a better future, and you think, wow, would I do that? I mean, they're not going to do it just because they're scallies. They are desperate to have a better life. And you have to then, when you talk to them and look into their eyes, and you realize they're doing exactly what we would do if we were faced with, you know, starvation or being killed every day.
It's desperation.
And I followed them all the way through. You go through places, you know, where the governments would play pawns. They would let some of them through, then they would stop, and then they didn't know where they were going or anything. And eventually we ended up in Berlin, and at that point you can talk to them, and you see their hopes and aspirations, and but sadness at having to leave home as well. I mean, we're so privileged to be able to witness stuff like that. You know, it takes your breath away sometimes.
But it kind of changes your outlook on life as well, I think.
Definitely.
You know, because you're standing in this calm beach, and then all of a sudden the chaos is coming closer, and it's closer and closer and closer. But then all of a sudden you're seeing human beings literally surviving, and it could go one way or the other.
It could, and the way they were welcomed or not welcomed, you know, you look at it and you think there must be something better than this. There must be something better than you know, the way people like that are treated, or the way, you know, when you see these horrible images of turtles in, you know, with plastic bottles stuck in their mouths, or whales with bin bags, and you know, you just think this is wrong. It really is wrong, and we need to. I think it's too late for us to, certainly for me, to impact on it, but your kids hopefully are going to be in the forefront of saving the planet. Because they have to, otherwise their kids aren't going to be here.
Well, that's what you want to pass down. You really want to pass down and educate them on how I think, not how they're going to be taught in the school. You have to, what I'm teaching them, I think is more important, because it's more coming from what I've witnessed and how I feel. And especially what you mentioned as well is you have to be happy as well in life, and don't chase it if it's not going to make you too happy, because still chasing, but I've got to get the balance right of, well, I do have a family, and I've got to chase something, but not so much. And you have to let things go. And sometimes when you let things go, it's more of a release from the shoulders, and you think, and actually,
that's what
this
I
is
meant
making us
about,
happier.
you know, the guys who think that they're going to be somebody, and then suddenly, when the day you realize that you're not, you can then concentrate on who you are, and do the best you can. I mean, you've still got enough years ahead of you at the moment. You know, you're strong. You know the business. You know your weaknesses and your strengths. You've built a reputation through hard work. You're not just doing stills, you're doing all this other stuff as well, which is what you have to
Storytelling.
do.
That's
And you are going to see changes, hopefully for the better, or at least the recognition of you as a creative person. When you it's interesting because photographers for years we had this weird thing that we have the right to be well paid and do well. And when people say that to me, I said, hang on, have you ever been on a bus in Dublin and you drive along and you see all these guys there at bus stops with their musical instruments, or you meet someone in a cafe who's writing poetry. It was only photographers who thought like that. Poets never made any money. Everyone can write, but how many people get paid to do that? Sculptors, musicians, millions of musicians, how many of them ever become Ed Sheeran or whatever? There was only photographers who had this kind of thing, well, if you don't give me 500 quid for my picture, it's outrageous. And so now, in this democracy now, rightfully, we have to struggle, and the very best ones, hopefully, will still come to the top.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. I hope that's going to be the case, Tom. But
We'll see.
We'll keep trying. I'll keep trying. You'll keep trying, and hopefully we'll get there.
When somebody says, how do you do all this stuff? I say, it's simple.
Get up in the morning.
Well, but when you support a team like Newcastle, then real trauma and tragedy.
Yes.